Hello everyone, this is Tom Fox. I'm the Compliance Evangelist, and I'd like to welcome you to the December edition of my 2017 One Month to a More Effective Compliance Program podcast series, where each month I take a deep dive into a specific part of a best practices compliance program. In the month of December, I'm taking a deep dive into better written standards, which form the very backbone of your compliance program. Written standards include codes of conduct, policies, and procedures, and we're going to be taking a very deep dive into the design of all of these, training, and revising and updating. We'll also take a look at the information communicated by the Department of Justice on what specific policies should be included in your best practices compliance program, including policies on gifts, travel, business entertainment, charitable donations, facilitation payments, third parties, and cybersecurity. We'll also take a look at certain enforcement actions and opinion releases to see what other information we can glean from these. My sponsor this month is my Doing Compliance Masterclass. We recently concluded the first masterclass in November 2017. I'm co-hosting this with Jonathan Marks at Markham LLC. We will be putting on a full series of classes in 2018. Check back for details. This month's podcast series will give you information which will allow you to set up the very foundation of your compliance program. My podcast series on 1 month to a more effective compliance program is a part of the Compliance Podcast Network. Day 12, charitable donation enforcement actions under the FCPA. When is a rose not a rose? When it is a charitable donation not made for philanthropic purposes, but one that violates the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act. I thought about this concept in the context of the Eli Lilly enforcement action. The Lilly enforcement action involved bribery schemes in 4 different countries, but I want to focus on the one in Poland because that was a situation where Lilly engaged in FCPA violations disguised as charitable contributions. One of the more interesting, if not anomalous things about this enforcement action is it followed a 2005, i.e. very old enforcement action, with a company called Sharing Plow. And Sharing Plow also got into trouble for making charitable donations in Poland. And the charity involved was the same in both actions. And indeed, the founder of the charity was also the foreign government official in both actions. Both companies were involved in the negotiations for the sales of products and services with the director of the Salesian Health Fund. He had established a charitable foundation, which I would note was a legitimate foundation, the Chudau Foundation, to engage in the restoration of castles, ancient castles in Poland. Both companies made donations to the Chudau Foundation at or near the time decisions were made regarding the purchase of their respective products and services by the health fund. The FCPA books and records violations for the donations stated they were all mischaracterized on both companies' books and records. In the case of Eli Lilly, there were a multitude of reasons listed for donations. Unfortunately, none of those indicated they were for influencing the decision of the Director General. They were listed of such things as purchase of computers in order to allow the foundation to develop its goals, and rentals for castles. So the reasons listed for the donations by Sharing Plow had at least had medical purposes or health service reasons listed. But once again, the Chudau Foundation was not engaged in charitable work around healthcare issues, but in renovating castles. With regard to Lilly, although the donations were made by a team approved by the company, the Medical Grant Committee, who reviewed the requests for such donations, the approval process was based upon the justification and description in submitted paperwork. Further, the tangential value to the stated purpose of the Chuddow Foundation was clearly a quid pro quo as an action to obtain business. Just as the description rental of castle is not a charitable donation but expenditure, even with that understanding, the SEC complaint noted that Lilly held no conferences at the castle. So frankly, it was an outright misrepresentation. The Sharing Plow complaint noted the company manager involved in the payment scheme provided false medical justifications for most of the payments on the documents that he submitted to the company's finance department. Additionally, he structured the payments so they were at or below his approval level, so he did not have to ask for permission to make the improper payments. The manager in question viewed these donations as dues that were required to be paid for assistance from the director of the Silesian Health Fund. So what are some of the red flags that come up for or from these two charitable donation enforcement actions? Well, the first is there was no due diligence. No due diligence was performed on the charity to identify the director of the Silesian Health Fund as the founder or his role in the Chuddow Foundation. Donations were not related to health care. While both companies permitted donations to healthcare-related funds, there was no follow-up to determine the purposes of the use of the donated funds. 3, the donations were outside the normal range of donation, in that the donations made to the Chuddow Foundation were 40% of the company's of Sharing Plow's promotional budget in 1 year, and disproportionate sales. The sales increased disproportionately compared with sales of other products in other areas of Poland, Europe, and the entire Europe-Middle East region. Also, suspicious timing. It was very interesting in the Eli Lilly SEC enforcement action. The SEC lined up the timing of the payments, or donations, I should say, which were relatively small, with the timing of contracts obtained or retained, and they were all within 24 hours. Lilly used the charitable donations to a charitable foundation, founded and administered by the head of one of the regional government health authorities. At the same time, the subsidiary was seeking the officials' support in placing Lilly drugs on the government reimbursement list. There were a total of 8 payments made to the charitable foundation. In addition to the charitable donations made, Lilly falsely characterized the proposed payments. So, what are today's 3 key takeaways? Well, we have relatively few FCPA enforcement actions involving charitable entities. In a later episode, we're going to go over some opinion releases, but in terms of enforcement actions, there are very few, so these 2 are very significant, and they really lay out what you need to know. So I heartily recommend that as a compliance practitioner, you study both of these enforcement actions. Number 2, what is the purpose of the charitable entity you are making the donation to? Here, the charitable entity was not healthcare related, but a castle renovation. Now, it was a legitimate charity, so they certainly had some points for that. But if it's a charity which is not healthcare related or in your core business area, you really need to have a good business justification. And finally, we're going to talk about this a lot in policies going forward, which is document your due diligence process around donees. Know who is on the boards of directors, know who the founder of the charity is, know who you are making the donation to. This is Tom Fox. Thank you very much for joining me on day 12 of 1 month to Better Written Standards, and I hope you'll join me tomorrow for day 13. This is Tom Fox again. Thank you for listening to this episode of 1 month to Better Written Standards in a Compliance Program. I hope you'll join me tomorrow for another episode. If you have listened to this podcast on iTunes, I would ask that you would rate our podcast, as it would help in our rankings and also help get the word out about the only daily podcast which will give you a hint or tip to improve your compliance program. Also, if you have any questions, you can email me at tfox@tfoxlaw.com. This is Tom Fox. Thank you again for listening. I hope you'll join me tomorrow. My podcast series of 1 month to a better compliance program is a part of the Compliance Podcast Network.